Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Steve Leibowitz. 165 days into the war in Gaza, Israel says it's going into Rafah to defeat remaining Hamas battalions, but Hamas gunmen are returning to areas like Shifa Hospital in Gaza, captured earlier by the IDF. We say we're going to force Hezbollah away from the northern border or Beirut will burn. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Israelis are still out of their homes in the north. The Biden administration and our allies are openly saying that they are fed up, mainly with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who many also in Israel are saying has become a burden on Israeli efforts to continue the war and post-war prospects. Well, I'm joined today by two guests to help figure out the current quagmires that have engulfed us. Amos Asa-El, an always astute Middle East analyst, and Ari Harrow, former Chief of Staff of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Before we begin, let's just hear from Senate Majority Leader Schumer and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
The Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. And I believe that holding a new election, once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future.
What Senator Schumer said, the majority of Israelis support our governments. 82% of Americans support Israel instead of Hamas, but the majority of Israelis support the policies that we're leading. Go into Rafah, destroy the remaining Hamas terrorist battalions, make sure that we don't put into Gaza, instead of Hamas, the Palestinian Authority that educates their children towards terrorism and the annihilation of Israel, and also an enormous majority here, including 99 Knesset members to 9, oppose the idea of ramming down a Palestinian state down our throats.
I want to get to some of those polls.
The majority of Israelis, this is a wake-up call to Senator Schumer. The majority of Israelis support the policies of my government. It's not a fringe government. It represents the policies supported by the majority of the people. If Senator Schumer opposes these policies, he's not opposing me. He's opposing the people of Israel.
Ari, let me start with you. The Prime Minister keeps talking about the Rafah operation, but there is still 1.3 million civilians still there, and there are no signs that they're moving. The world and all of our allies are warning against the operation. The U.S. insists it's not seen a workable plan. And now, after yesterday's Biden-Netanyahu call, Israel agreed to send a team to Washington to discuss the Rafah plan. Who's in charge?
I think that the goal of destroying Hamas has been clear from day one of this war, and there is no outcome to the current battles that don't include Israel dealing with Rafah and finishing off Hamas's military capabilities. We cannot send 100,000 plus residents of the South back to their homes without knowing that Hamas's capabilities have been destroyed. With that in mind, there should be no question as to what Israel needs to do. Israel has proven itself, at least to our people, the most humanitarian and the most conscious of civilian casualties of any country in the world. And therefore, any plan, any military plan that takes on Rafah would most definitely figure out a way to remove those civilians. Just like we moved them from the north to the south, we can move them from Rafah to other parts of the Gaza Strip and deal militarily with what needs to be dealt with.
Amos, if we do move forward with the Rafah operation without U.S. approval, what are the guarantees we'd have the support we would need in post-war Gaza? And if there's a war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, will we have American weapons to fight it?
I'm not concerned about the arms supply. The quantities that this war requires, and also Israel's own production ability and America's willingness to back Israel in these situations are really beyond doubt, and that's not what this situation is about. The American impatience with Israel it's about Netanyahu's consistent refusal to portray any picture concerning the order that will prevail in Gaza the morning after the fighting ends. He has to say something about that to portray some kind of a diagram that will inspire what will follow the fighting. And what Senator Schumer said, which was indeed silly on his part, this is not the kind of situation you address from the floor of the American Congress. It's a domestic foreign country situation. However, it did reflect the feeling of the vast majority in Israel, which Netanyahu conveniently ignores when he says that most Israelis support this war. That's very true. But most Israelis also consistently say that the war's outbreak is his failure and that he should step down.
Ari, the Biden administration, and as was just pointed out, and even Majority Leader Schumer, are saying that Netanyahu and his extremist government are harming Israeli interests, and they accuse him of operating for his own political survival. Most everyone, friends and foe of Bibi, know that that's the case. Might we be better off with another leader?
So first and foremost, Senator Schumer was extremely vocal around the accusations of Russian intervention in a U.S. democratic process in the previous presidential election. And I think that to have a U.S. leader voice such criticism on internal domestic politics in the state of Israel is not detrimental or harmful to Netanyahu. It is harmful to the state of Israel. Whether you agree with Netanyahu, don't agree with Netanyahu, it is our right and it is our duty for this to be defined and decided by the people of Israel and not by external forces, even if they're friends in the United States. Having said that, I will touch on one of the points that Amot's made, and that is that while people have voiced their opinions or criticism towards Netanyahu, polling does show till this day that the majority of Israelis want to wait with a change of government or wait for an election until the war is over. We now have our boys and girls fighting in the streets of Gaza. They're sharing tanks, they're sharing helicopters, they're sharing jets, and they're sharing quarters. And we do not need as a country, and this is felt by the overwhelming majority of Israelis, we do not need to find ourselves in a position where we start a debate while people are putting their lives on the line. The time will come for the Israeli people to speak, and that will come once the guns have gone silent. Until that time, we need all the support we can get in a very clear war of modernity and good versus evil and fanaticism.
Well, I certainly agree, but there's not much war actually going on in Gaza right now. Most of the troops are not currently there, and we seem to be going back to areas we've already captured. But Amos, let me go on in this direction. I'm having a hard time navigating even the near future. Where do you expect we'll be at, let's say, by the end of Ramadan? In just 3 weeks' time, will the Rafah operation have begun? Will a hostage deal and ceasefire be underway?
I think that everybody's energies are focused right now, if even in entirely different ways. Everyone is focused on the hostage negotiation. And I think that this is why all the actors, even the ostensibly remote Hezbollah, all the actors are waiting to see what transpires in upcoming weeks in Qatar, whether there is a deal or there is no deal. And until then, since no one can predict the result of these talks, everybody is simply waiting to see what they produce. If they produce a deal, then obviously everybody will focus on seeing how it is actually executed. And that can last some very long months. If the talks fail, which there is at least a 50% chance that they will, then I can assure you that fighting will resume sooner rather than later and in earnest.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
All right, just changing direction slightly. Ari, you're just back from an extended book tour in the United States. The book, My Brother's Keeper, is about your years in the Prime Minister's office. How was the reception? What were the questions like in a time like this?
So thank you for that, Steve. I actually have a copy of the book right here. The reception was extremely positive. I say this, with a tremendous eeriness to it. Obviously, I began working on the book and finished the book probably a little bit over a year before the atrocities of the 7th of October. And little did I know that what I was writing in that book would truly be a microcosm for what we saw on that day and every day since. It touches extensively on Hamas kidnapping 3 teenage boys, Israel's military operation that followed in Gaza, and the tension between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu and the relations between the U.S. and Israel. I think that the relevance to the current situation is what I most discussed and most of the questions touched on. And one important point that I do want to make, as you referred to the book, because we were discussing earlier in the segment about U.S. intervention and the U.S. stance on what's happening here in Israel. One of the points that I make in the book is that Netanyahu in 2014 and the beginning of 2015, standing up to the pressures of the Obama administration, whether it was with regard to progress on a Palestinian state or not properly dealing with Hamas in that conflict, is ultimately, in my opinion, what led to peace in the region and the Abraham Accords, meaning the peace that we still enjoy today during this conflict with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco, and with other nations and other countries was a result of Israel's ability to stick to its guns, to defeat the powers of evil that threaten not just us, but other Arab countries in the region. And I think it's imperative upon us to remember that, and it's imperative upon the Biden administration to recognize that truth as well.
By the way, Ari, that intervention that you spoke about by Netanyahu when he spoke in Congress from the Senate floor against the wishes of then President Obama, the Schumer speech might have been payback. Amos, I imagine you might be thinking about or already working on your next book. If it's about the October 7th war, what might the message be?
Well, actually, the book I'm working on is not about this war, but my previous book, which was basically about political misjudgments throughout Jewish history, before that, biblical Israel's history, was initially telling in that it, despite having written before that, it effectively foresaw and warned that a divided Israel will not stand. And then came the events of the constitutional mayhem here in Israel that vindicated what I wrote there. And then came these events, which I effectively also forewarned, because I showed there that in ancient Israel's many civil wars, many of them were followed by foreign invasion. It happened in 3 biblical wars, and it happened during 2 civil wars during the Roman era, the most notable of which was the one that ended in Jerusalem's destruction, which while the Romans were approaching Jerusalem, the Jews were fighting each other within the walls of all Jerusalem. There were multiple Jewish militias fighting each other. This is what I warned, and I'm sorry to say that what we're witnessing is its vindication.
Well, I hope the outcome is better this time around. Ari, the only good things that I can think of in those days right after October 7th was the tremendous feeling of unity throughout the nation. I get the sense that the United Nation of Israel is no more, and instead we're a nation that's again divided on the hostage issue, the draft issue, and frankly, leadership. Do you disagree?
I do disagree. And I think that we have to differentiate between those that have an interest in our division, namely political figures and some in the media, and the people themselves. As I mentioned earlier, the soldiers that are fighting in Gaza do not discuss judicial reform, and they don't discuss the economy, and they're not discussing our policies on education. They are united in their goals. When you talk about the hostages, if you look to the people, everybody in Israel wants to bring the hostages home immediately. There are tactical debates as to what the best way to make that happen is. And I think that that's legitimate, and it's actually welcome in a democratic society. Obviously, you don't want one voice coming out of the public. You want multitude of voices, but you want them to be debated and discussed in a civil and accepting fashion. I think that that is still very much prevalent amongst the public and the people. I think that our leaders, from right and from left, and of course, including this current government, have an interest in widening that divide in order to accentuate what makes them different. And we, the people, have to, I would say, fight that off.
Amos, I'd like to come back to you with a question I asked Ari earlier in the broadcast. In your view, might Israel's future be brighter if Prime Minister Netanyahu was no longer our leader?
Yes. Generally speaking, I'm no fan of the school of thought that claims that history is the doing of individuals. And I tend to shrink the role of the individual in history, unlike say, historian Thomas Carlyle, who said that history is basically about biography. I dispute that. However, in our situation, we do face a leader who has become so dominant in shaping events and so controversial in his conduct and also so protracted in his durability. It's time for him to understand that his extensive tenure at Israel's helm has reached its end. And this is clearly the view of the consistent view of the vast Israeli majority. And what will replace him, I have no idea. It certainly will not be a leader, never mind what that leader's name is, but it won't be a leader of his type of leadership. It will be much less charismatic and much less autocratic and much more humble. And I think that under the circumstances, this is what most Israelis will welcome. And to answer your question, will also hopefully produce a more optimistic era.
All right, I'd like to throw out the last question, I think it might be the last question, to both of you, and whoever wants to jump in is welcome. It appears that in the United States, the next presidential election is going to be between Biden and Trump. Trump spoke last night, and he made a comment saying, in effect, that any American Jews that support Joe Biden are against their Judaism and against Israel. I mean, I don't even know what to say or what to think about it, but I'd love for one of you two to jump in.
Go ahead, Ari.
Okay. So I think, firstly, President Trump making, bombastic statements is nothing new, and it's something that we will see over and over and over again. I do think that there are extremely concerning elements in the Democratic Party. There are in the Republican Party as well. But the ability, if you look at the policies of the Biden administration for the first couple months of the war, and you see the shift that has taken place over the last 6 weeks, and it's no secret to any observer of U.S. politics that at least a certain degree of that is a response to the domestic political pressure he's coming over that gives you a glimpse into the challenges that a Democratic, a newly elected Democratic President Biden would bring in his relationship with Israel. That, no question, is a problem. The push for a Palestinian state today, on the heels of October 7th, is something that the people here in Israel are not ready to discuss. And I think that the statement from Trump, while obviously politically motivated, does raise concerns with some of the elements on the Democratic side.
Amotz, former President Trump says he would end the war really quickly, tells Netanyahu get it over with already. He would also end the war between Russia and Ukraine, apparently. Amotz, if you would look forward with us to a Trump presidency and how it might impact us.
Well, the only thing we can predict about Trump in any aspect of his conduct is unpredictability. And we do know from the term that he did have in the White House that it was extremely erratic, that hardly anyone served as either an executive or an advisor or even just a secretary. And this is no way to run a railroad, certainly not a superpower, certainly not the free world. We have no reason to believe any of his promises, not necessarily because he's consciously lying, although of course he does that too, but simply because he has no idea what he wants to do. He works from now to now. And I think that this alone, even before you discuss his recent rhetoric concerning the Jews, is alarming. And when it comes to the Middle East, who knows? Maybe because of his impulsiveness, something actually good can come out. Sometimes impulsiveness is actually can actually be rewarding, and sometimes it's what's necessary. But in most cases, it's very bad to have, and this is what Donald Trump will bring in abundance.
All right, we're just about out of time, but I'd like to just come back to Ari one more time. There was a conversation last night between Biden and Netanyahu. From what you know of Bibi, is he able to, kind of kiss and make up? Are we hoping for better relations moving forward?
Netanyahu is not an individual that takes offense to these or that statements. He's very focused and matter of fact, especially when dealing with diplomacy and international relations. He has certain goals, and he will do and say whatever it takes to achieve those goals. And as such, if a harsh conversation serves his interests, then that's what will be said.
All right.
And if not, then it won't.
Ari, they're telling me we're out of time. I'm really sorry. I enjoy my time with both of you. Thanks to our guests, Ari Harrow and Amotz El. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV. Thanks for watching. Let's win the war and bring them home.